We're going to have more of a conversation in this particular panel. I want to thank everybody who's been here today. There's so many experts in this room, and I also thank the Sustainable Food Trust for hosting this event and for Patrick Holden for inviting me to talk with the business leaders in this space. So we've heard a lot about the challenges. I'm Naomi Starkman. I think Patrick introduced me. I couldn't hear because I was being mic'd. I'm Naomi Starkman. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Civil Eats. We're a daily news site. Thank you. Thank you. We focus on sustainable agriculture. We've been writing about these issues since 2009. It's a great pleasure for us to be here with so many of you. And we heard from many speakers this morning about some of the challenges, obviously massive complexities around the food system, some potential solutions. Right now we have an opportunity to discuss with some of the industry leaders some of their challenges, some of the opportunities they have, and really the nut question for these leaders is how do we move the needle further, faster? How do we scale up sustainability? So with me is Walter Robb. He's the co-CEO of Whole Foods Market. Walter is has a long and varied entrepreneur. He doesn't want me to introduce him. You all know Walter Robb. Welcome, Walter. Theresa, would you like me to introduce you? Okay, Theresa Marquez is the mission executive of Crop Cooperative Organic Valley. She's been a passionate advocate for organic food and farming since 1978 and is a pioneer of the natural foods movement. She joined Crop Cooperative, the nation's largest organic farmer-owned co-op, in 1995 and soon became the co-op's first chief marketing executive. Next to Theresa, yes, welcome, Theresa. Next to Theresa is Howard Shapiro. He's the Chief Agriculture Officer at Mars, a Senior Fellow in Plant Sciences at UC Davis, and a Distinguished Fellow at the World Agroforestry Center in Kenya. And he has more than 45 years' experience working with sustainable agriculture and agroforestry systems. And last but certainly not least is Fedele Bauccio. He's the co-founder and CEO of Appétit Management Company. Fedele has been in this space for as long as I've known and is really a leader revolutionizing the food service industry with its Farm to Fork program starting in 1999. And we'll hear a lot more about what Fedele has been able to do. And a huge round of applause to Bon Appétit for serving the food today. So I want to have a conversation with each of you. I want you to start very quickly sort of addressing some of the highlights of the work that you're doing, some of the challenges you're experiencing in sustainability, but what are some of the opportunities, and then briefly mention what you think some of the mechanisms for change might be. I want to also really point out Tyler Norris's comment this morning that equity is key in this conversation. So to the extent that you can point out in your work where you're focusing on food access, on equity, on food justice, I think that would be very helpful to thread the needle on that particular point. Walter?
Go first, yeah. Morning, everybody. I would say first, I just reflecting on this morning that it's been some of us have been doing this for a while, 30 plus years, to really surface the value of whole food, not with a small W, whole food, healthy food, fresh food. It's taken a generation to surface that awareness and that visibility along with the policy changes that happened that Kathleen mentioned. And also I think thinking about that, how that's happened, the principles behind that, the principles of which I think will guide us on the way forward, which is transparency, responsibility, accountability, this idea that you're responsible for the actions you take as an individual or as a company. These principles are now landing in a way that's really helping the momentum of all this. So I think the way that we've tried to take those is through some things I'll speak about later, but it's a combination of investing in true cost accounting, collaborative relationships with suppliers, which is based on cost of production, return on investment, and a profit. It's not a commodity-based model. It's a relationship-based model that actually the price moves a lot less. It moves much more on a quarterly reset based on those metrics. And also through directly investing in the marketplace in various programs. One example, two examples, our Whole Choice program, which we started to kind of provide a fair price to producers in the developing world. Example is the mangoes in Haiti after the storm down there, and I'll tell some more details. And the second example is our work in the underserved communities of America. There's 6,500 underserved communities in America. And the health disparities that were mentioned this morning are absolutely stunning. To give you one example, in the city of Chicago, on the south side, the life expectancy is 10 years less than the life expectancy in the rest of Chicago. The cost of dollars is enormous. The cost of human potential is incalculable. It's a moral problem, and it's right in front of us. We're trying to do something about that, so I'll share about that one later.
Thank you. Theresa.
Morning, everyone, and what an honor and a privilege to be with you and the whole changemakers of the good food movement. I guess I was going to start out with actually showing a slide. I wondered if you all had it, which is both an opportunity and a challenge. And so this actually is 27 years of sustainable farmer pay, and it is. All these issues that we're talking about have a lot to do with an economic paradigm that we are living with that actually isn't really working. I guess all of you out here probably have heard that new statistic that 62 people have half the wealth in the world. And so we're at Crop, we're always asking this question. Just every day we ask it actually, how much is enough? And so, we've done something that's very challenging and also that we've been doing it for 27 years. We started out with this idea of in 1988, we had already lost 4 million farmers. We have less than 1 million farmers left, and of those million farmers, a lot of them are Christmas tree farmers. And so really not a lot of them are actual farmers. The Earl Butts Get Big, Get Out is really held. And so, what are we trying to do with our economic model when we don't actually ever even address it, even as a group, about really how much is enough? So a cooperative is a really interesting model. It's a challenge, but it's actually a democratic model. So I'd love to show this slide as a start out as to who we are, because when we started out in 1988, we unhinged from dairy. We said, you know what, we're not going to, our pay price to the farmers is going to be what's fair, what's stable, and what they need. And so we started that out, and that's what we have to think. And I really enjoy the speakers today because we heard a lot of boldness. We heard a lot of, we need to get out there and do something different. We can't be afraid to step out of the boxes we're in. So, in 1988, farmers were going out of business. They were dying, and they weren't going to stay in business. So we didn't have a lot to lose by doing something bold. And if we think about what we're trying to do today, I don't think we have a lot to lose either. We need to think boldly right now. And so I kind of just want to start out by putting us in this big context of, we're in an extraordinary time, and we all have to be extraordinary people. But we did something. We were bold, and we actually, look at that. That projected pay price that you're seeing down there, and if you can see it, $17.56, it actually went down to $14. If you're a conventional dairy farmer now, and all of us who have so much heart for farmers should be feeling pretty sad for those farmers, because they're getting paid what they got paid in 1980. And that's almost criminal. So I think that would start out my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Theresa. Howard?
Yes, I was asked by Patrick specifically not to talk too much about what we do, but to talk more about money, since we're a privately held, very well-situated company called Mars Incorporated. And to answer Steve Hilton's last question, we are zero carbon footprint in the United States, totally offset by one of the largest wind farms in the world that we built. We have zero waste that goes to any type of facility. Everything is recycled. We are building absolutely transparent supply chains, 100%, for all the crops we use that I am responsible for as Chief Agricultural Officer. We have projects going on for which we gain nothing. The African Orphan Crops Consortium, sequencing and improving the nutrition on the 101 key food crops pan-Africa as a public service. We have a project with the Tata Foundation on affordable nutrition for all in India to raise the nutritional levels as high as humanly possible, as quickly as possible, to end the incident of 48% stunting. Those of you who know anything about stunting, it's permanent, neurological, physical, and economic. It turns out that 7% of the children in the United States are stunted. So to give you an idea of the scale, I could go on. We've spent 20 years and 250 scientific papers in top-tier journals on a little series of small parts called cocoflavanols, flavanthriols, and flavonoids, which have been shown absolutely to improve human health. This is not chocolate. It is cocoflavanols. Don't listen to all of our competitors who talk about eating dark chocolate is healthy for you. It is not. Cocoflavanols are healthy for you. So we sit in a unique position being privately held to do lots of things.
Thank you. Fedele.
Wow, I thought dark chocolate was good. So I learned something today. So I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you all for coming. I've been doing this a long time. If I take you back to when I dreamed about starting the company in 1985, there probably would have been maybe 5 people in a room like this. And I did feel like Prince Charles. I was kind of a lonely person out there trying to fight the system. But today, Bon Appetit is a restaurant company that works in the contract environment. And the dream was to bring chefs and great food into that side of the business, because I was appalled at what was going on university campuses and in corporate America. And I wanted to do something to change that model and do something to bring chefs into the business. That was unheard of some 28 years ago because it wasn't the sexy part of the business and the chefs wouldn't come with me. But slowly we started to attract the right people, and we started working with farms in the 80s, trying to deal with flavor and trying to buy as much as we possibly could, as close to the kitchens as possible. So this whole thing about sustainable food started for me as a culinary act, not a political act, but it's ended up in a different kind of way now. We have done a lot of initiatives that I'm very, very proud of. We were the first company in the United States to deal with cage-free eggs. I think it was 2003. We have been dealing with non-therapeutic antibiotics and protein for many, many years. We've done far-reaching issues on animal welfare and have led the industry in terms of all the animal welfare initiatives we've done. I could go on and on. I think that we've also done a lot with farm worker rights across the country with people in Immokalee and so forth. So we're a very highly sustainable company. And I can tell you that we really care about the environment and the planet, the animals, and it's the way we source through our definition of what sustainability is and how we source our food. And I think it's part of our DNA as a company, and hopefully we've led the way to change the industry to more of an ecological model. You've heard all about the issues, so we don't have to go into that, but I really believe the key to the future is how we message the issues of what we heard about this morning. This has been a journey for me for a long, long time, and I still think we're in a journey, but I have a tremendous amount of hope for young people that understand these issues on college and university campuses, young people right here in the Bay Area in the high-tech sector. They ask where the food comes from, are you supporting community? They ask all of those good questions. And so maybe this journey will continue. It might take another generation, but I'm hopeful for the future because of the young people we have that really care about these issues that we care about.
Thank you, Fedele. So, Walter, I want to start a little bit with you, getting in a little bit on a more granular level about some of the projects and things that you've been focused on. When we spoke before the panel, you mentioned a few things that you felt were really good examples of some of Whole Foods' work. And I do want to start with the food access question. Maybe we can start with that, and then we'll follow up with some other questions.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the great dialogue that's happening in the country now is about the disparities that exist throughout the system. Food is one example of that. But for me, several years ago, thinking at how the disparity in food access is just simply stunning. You can go to the USDA website, you can look at the ERS map, and you can see these areas I'm speaking about. But access that everybody takes for granted just doesn't exist. And the cost of that in so many ways is so expensive. You can pull the public health statistics and look for yourself at how these, in Detroit, for example, which is where we ended up starting in 2009, the cost of diabetes, the cost of high blood pressure and so forth is all documented. You can see it. And so, and clearly when you go there, there'd been no supermarket in downtown Detroit for 50, they left in the 50s. So there simply was no access, defined as sort of easy access within a 2-mile radius. So I think for us, you know, obviously we've been building stores for a long time, but this sort of idea that healthy food is for some people, healthy food is for all people. And healthy food is for all communities, not some communities. And I think, you know, we can see the racial composition of the room here today. We've got a challenge to bridge some. America's going to work best when it's more inclusive and it's more relevant to more cultures and ethnicities. And so our effort to try to take a stab at that through building the store in downtown Detroit, then New Orleans, and now we're building one on the south side of Chicago in Englewood, which if anybody does their research will see is a very challenged part of Chicago. Jim Slama certainly knows that. And I'm hoping not that we're going to solve the problem, but that we're going to begin to show that companies can take direct action to try to go at something like this. Food access and the consequences of that is a very big problem in this country. Some of that rolls up into the data that you saw this morning from the Kaiser fellow. But the question is, what are you going to do about it? And the answer is you've got to get into action. And so we've tried in our small way to do that. And now I'm working in the city of Baltimore, which, by the way, has the worst disparity of health outcomes in the city, in America. The west side and the east side of Baltimore, absolutely stunning. And so there's one area for you that the model of how subsidized food or cheap food, which has been the predominant offering, you know, for example, 80% of the food stamps or 85% of the food stamps in Detroit go through the convenience stores because there isn't the other alternative. So there's an example of the whole system kind of working, the choices that people have. And you say, well, why don't they just take transportation? Well, a lot of times the transportation doesn't work. The buses are broken and the lines don't work. It's not that easy for them to move around. And so this is a place where food access, food justice, social justice do intersect. And there's an opportunity for us to make real and tangible steps towards that.
What do you say? I mean, so many people here in the room are, you know, obviously early adopters. All of us, I think, probably shop at Whole Foods. A lot of criticism that Whole Foods gets is that it's, you know, whole paycheck, people can't afford it, organic food is elite. What do you think it's going to take to scale up better food to more people so that Whole Foods is a leader in the space for everyone? Everyone can go to Whole Foods and afford it, not just those who have deeper pockets.
Yep. Well, I mean, we're starting a new format store opens in LA next month, which is called 365, which is an attempt to take a step the same without compromising the quality and the standards of the food, which people often leave out of the equation. But that's one effort. But I think with these stores we're building in the underserved community, our business model is we're stretching it and pushing it, and we're finding ways to just to make the food more affordable by getting some guidance from the community as well. But look, you know, it took all these years just to get to this place. I'm not going to apologize for what the hard work over the last 30 some odd years to build the company to this place, but where do we go from here? It's going to take our efforts and the efforts of many others to be able to make this happen. I'm just trying to do something about it. I don't want to yip-yap. I want to actually go out and do something about it. And I can tell you that when you make a direct investment of your time and energy in a community in the right way, it does make an impact on people's lives and people's health. So I see what's happening in Detroit now as others are making similar efforts, and the city's kind of on the move. And so anyways, that's just, I think it's the model. You're talking about the true cost accounting. In the end, it takes a direct investment of some sort to create the change, to create the jobs, to create the change of conditions. And that's what I think all companies have to look and see, how can they work that into their path forward. And so that's my thoughts about that.
And just a little follow-up question on that. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the loan program that you've had since 2006. I wanted to talk a little about the Responsibly Grown program that you guys just instituted. Say a little bit more about how you're working with farmers and how that's benefiting the producers.
Yeah, well, the theme of the conference here is true cost accounting. The main way I think most is to do it through our producer relationships, where we try to build the contract based on true cost accounting. And I already mentioned the three components, which is the true cost of production, unsubsidized costs of land, water, and so forth. The return on invested capital, so obviously you have to continue to make investments in their farm or their production as they go, and then a fair profit. And so you basically quantify those numbers, and there's the transparency principle, and then you're able to set a price that's fair to the farmer and fair to the retailer and then fair to the customer. And so these models, like the example I mentioned to you on the phone was Panorama Beef, which is a Northern California grass-fed company, first-class company, and that's how we do it with them. And so the price is reset every quarter based on how those numbers change, but it's about a 16% premium to the grain-fed commodity beef. But it doesn't yo-yo around, so there's a way to build a sustainable, sustainable model, and the way they've built their model is the ranchers hold the cattle all the way through, and then there's incentives for them to either, if their yield improves or if we're able to use more of the animal, they get additional premium on their price. But the model, the pricing actually it's built on the transparency of information and the fair return to the producer for their work. And then the price to the customer reflects that, those economics. And I think there's countless examples of setting up your contracts that way, but using the power of the marketplace to be able to convey what is a fair price for the cost of the food. The other example I gave you was the mangoes in Haiti. At the time the storm hit, they could sell the mango tree for 38 cents for charcoal. Everybody's looking for wood, and they could do that. If they sell the fruit to a middleman, they made $15 a year, and we set it up on a fair trade price after the storm, and we were giving them $75 a year per tree. And some of that they needed some cash at the time. Some of it was the social premium to incentivize replanting more trees. And so we actually set a goal of going from 500 farmers to 3,000 farmers in Haiti to do that. And that's actually what's happened. We've dialed back the cash, but now the social premium goes to continue to plant and invest in the trees. And so you'll see if you go in the stores, you'll see I actually brought some, but I left them over there. The whole trade sticker actually reflects that commitment to a true cost accounting or to a two-way cost accounting to be able to give the producer that sort of a premium. So there's other examples in the marketplace, but using the relationships, structuring your buy relationships in that way rather than on a commodity basis allows the true cost of production of food to be reflected in the cost to the customer. And so there's a couple of examples for you. I have others, but there's lots of other people up here.
And those are great. We'll definitely come back to follow up with you. Theresa, I want to talk to you a little bit about Organic Valley. As you know, $1 billion in sales. It's quite impressive for an organization that started out, I think, with 7 farms. I wanted to talk to you about that model, the cooperative model. It's not something that we see often in the United States. The investment that you're making in your farmers. And share with us a little bit about how that's been for you as a business, from the economics of being a business, and what the return has been overall for the farmers as well.
Well, being a co-op, and I started out by saying about, the economic models that we're looking at right now is, when you're an IPO, and Walter certainly can talk about that a little bit more, you get stuck sometimes serving the valuation and serving the value of what your stockholders want. When you're a co-op, you're serving your members, and it's a very, very different model. And it's actually one that I would love to offer as potentially something we ought to really think about. Maybe, cooperation is kind of like democracy, pretty tough. In fact, it's probably another word for democracy. It's kind of interesting, just to give you an example. We were approach to be in the raw milk business, and it's not legal in a lot of states, and the farmers debated it for a year. It's economics, it's liabilities and so on. And then there was a vote, and the raw milk folks lost. And I was one of the people who wanted to do raw milk because raised my kids on it and so on. And we sat there and we got all these phone calls. I mean, overwhelmingly. Hundreds and hundreds of people in the raw milk industry. They were stimulated, of course, by some of the organizations and said, how can you be against raw milk? And it's like, we're not against raw milk. We just decided it's not our model and we're not going to do that. So that was a decision, and that's one of the tough decisions you have to make all the time as to what not just is economically correct for what you're going to do, but also, what your members think is going to be best for them. And sometimes you don't agree with them. And what about that? In a democracy, when you don't get your way, what do? I don't think we have a democracy right now in the United States. So I like to offer up the co-op model. I think we could have even a hybrid. It doesn't have to be strictly co-op because that's got some challenges as well. Having an all-farmer board sometimes is got its challenges. But we have to do something. You know who said we were born to cooperate? It was Marcus Aurelius, and I believe that was thousands of years ago as the Roman Empire. But we were born to cooperate. What does that mean to us? And perhaps, we in the organic industry refer to something called the organic circular firing squad, and we have to all the time be trying to determine what is our common ground. And I would just say that the kinds of questions of how this economic model can work sometimes is a lot of meetings and discussion and trying to evaluate, of course, looking at true cost accounting for a lot of the things that we do. But sometimes we make decisions that aren't always in the interest of what our bottom line is. Sometimes we make decisions that are in the interest of what's good for our farmers, and we'll take a loss because they're our members, and if that's what they need, then we go for it. And so we take these bold risks. Walter's, I'm, one of his big vendors. I might even suggest we might be in one of your top 5 vendors. And I know that when we go into Whole Foods and we say we're going to increase our price, the buyers aren't really thrilled about that. And, we have this back and forth that we have to do with them. And sometimes we take some big risks. And we actually say, well, guess what? If you don't want to pay our price, then which is what the farmers need, we probably aren't going to sell to you. We never say that to Whole Foods. But it's just, these are some tough decisions that you have to make when you're a farmer's co-op because you're serving the farmers and in this whole cooperative way. And I guess that's a long answer to a short question.
Well, and I want to follow up on that because, and I asked Walter this question, which is the question of price. So, I think we'd be really remiss if we left this conference and the main takeaway message, and I know I spoke to Fedele about this, is that we all just have to pay a little bit more for food, right? But that's a question that we're all asking ourselves. It's a question I asked of Walter, and it's a question I want to ask of you. Where in your messaging, how are you able to charge a higher price for organic food? How are you messaging that around milk?
Thank you for asking that. In fact, Fedele, I really, really appreciated what you just said, is the messaging's the toughest, some of the toughest things that we do here. We have to remember that the true cost of food is a tactic that serves a goal that hopefully serves a bigger purpose. And so this messaging all the time is so difficult. How I wish we didn't have to spend 20 cents of our dollar on health, because then we could pay our farmers more, and we could start looking at our farmers like they were doctors and lawyers, like we look at that, like elevate their status would be something that would be super great, and so that we'd be proud to be paying a good instead of trying to figure out how we're going to make it through, the next day and for a lot of people pay our health insurance. So there's a conundrum there, which is such a huge issue to try and grapple with. So I think that this whole idea of messaging, I just want to say this. There's education, there's information. We're going to collect all this incredible data, all these numbers. We're going to know what the true cost is of food. But how are we going to message this out into a busy, busy world that we can help them understand? And there's one thing that I think I've learned in my 38 or 40 years in this, being in marketing, in that education and information is great, but the new way we have to look at it is, I call it the big E, and that's engagement. And so we've been doing a lot of experiments on how we can engage the consumer, and a lot of it is all of us have to learn the art of inquiry and help people tease it out of their own knowledge. And so have I the answers for what it means to be a great messenger and to get people engaged? No, but I've done a few experiments over the past couple of decades that have been fantastic.
And there's a panel later on communications, which I think is really essential to this whole conversation around how we message true cost accounting for those who are interested in that topic.
But how about this? High quality food, quality food costs more. And that's the truth. It just costs more to produce. And so you can change how you use it. You can eat less. You can change the combinations. But backing away the fact that it fundamentally costs more to produce quality food, that is the truth. And a lot of times folks are unwilling to say that or unwilling to deal with that. And I think that's part of this conversation is to be able to just say that is the truth. It does.
And I guess
and not apologize for it.
And I guess the follow-up point to that is how do we change that? How do we make high quality food less expensive? How do we
Well, is that the goal? Yes, less expensive, so it's more available, but is that really the goal? Or is it the fact that cheap food is basically cost too little with all the attendant consequences and the formula needs to change? What is it? And how much of people are they're spending their money on food, and that conversation as well, too. So this is a rich conversation, but it isn't just about, let's take the cost of this food down to the cost of this food. That can't be the right answer.
Howard.
There is a place where that's true and it's where it's false. And this is where money comes into the conversation because all innovation requires money. The innovation to create quality cheeses or to have whole foods or to have Bon Appetit is an innovation, but it takes money. And money is an endeavor with a high degree of uncertainty. Those of you who know about what innovation is, it's a high degree of uncertainty. And I don't know if Jonathan Foley's still here, but I'd like to poke a hole in part of his conversation today, which was specifically when we talked about the Green Revolution, the failure of the Green Revolution, everybody was excited and applauded. That's like applauding a dentist who's going to operate on your teeth tomorrow morning who practiced in 1960 and hasn't changed his practice. The Green Revolution was created to stop starvation in India and in Pakistan. The two countries working together with a guy named Norman Borlaug and M.S. Swaminathan. And they stopped the starvation. But you know what happened? We all just stepped back and said, we don't have to do any more. We stopped innovation because it costs money. So in order to do exactly what I was asked to do by Patrick, innovation almost never fails due to a lack of certainty. It's almost always because of a lack of discipline, which the organic movement suffers some notions about discipline sometimes. So a series of questions, because it's not only important for us to ask questions, but I want to ask questions of you all too. Where's the money to grow the food needed to feed a population of 9.6 billion people? How are we going to solve that? Where's the money to create new business models that convert wasted food into affordable, safe food that tastes good? And where's it going to come from? Where's the money to raise global food safety standards? I bet none of you in this room can tell me what goes actually on in a factory. At the most microscopic level. So we're developing with IBM a methodology to sequence a factory so we can know everything that's in that factory to protect humans from foodborne diseases. Where's the money and urgency to change the whole world food system and mainstream nutrition? Because when you talk about calories, I'm not really interested in anything you want to say. If you want to talk about nutrition, I'll talk to you all day long. Because the issue is not calories. You can fill your belly with cassava, you can fill it with rice, but it's not nutrition. And where's the money going to come from to change the system from food security to nutrition security? And where's the money going to come from in the state of California to unlock chronic hunger and malnutrition in the Central Valley? Very few people are really thinking that the Central Valley is as bad as Mumbai. And in fact, it is. And where's the money to create resilience to climate change? Water, nutrient use efficiency, increase flat yields, implement breeding programs to deliver nutritional security. And where's the money to develop for the first time in history nitrogen fixation in maize, rice, and wheat? You could almost eradicate the entire nitrogen pollution problem if you got nitrogen fixation in plants. Where are all the foundations? Where's the government with all their spend? Where is nitrogen fixation on the calendar? And it's not anywhere. And who is going to deliver inclusive well-being? We talk very generally about, how we have to have a just and social food system. You ought to read sometimes a little pamphlet by a guy named Joe Stiglitz, Amartya Sen, and Jean-Paul Fatoussi, which defines inclusive well-being, which should be really the mantra which we operate on. And where's the money to demand economic and policy interventions that would enable each of us, our companies, and others working in large-scale food production, including retailers, to switch the sourcing to mainly, if not exclusively, sustainably produced raw materials? How many of you are going to stand up in this room and are going to say, my company, my practice is only going to deal with sustainability? The number is pretty small. I'm happy to stand up and say that. The key is uncommon collaborations. We vilify corporations, we vilify this, we vilify that. It's no longer silos of any topic you want to talk about. It's all horizontal collaboration. You need to think about who your enemies are and who are unlikely participants. And when we say we got $50 million a year for the next 5 years for a series of projects, it's nothing. Yesterday, Ag Funder announced $31 million in startup cash. And Alibaba announced $2.1 billion to invest in a food delivery company for China. That's money. So is the problem money?
So Howard, these are great questions. And I think everybody in this room, we're going to work for the next couple days to try to answer them. What I want to ask of you is what your company is doing to address some of those questions.
We're doing everything I've talked about because we are 100 plus years old and we want to be in a business in another 100 years. I'm sure everyone who's got a company here wants to be in business for the next generation, We're privately held. When we look at the questions you've been talking about, margins after conversions, we can modify that. We don't have to have a margin that is X or Y or Z. We can have a margin that's B or C or D to build a market for a product. The question is, so few of us really understand, I think in fact, what it takes to run a real company day to day, cover the cost of the employees, cover the cost of the materials, cover the cost of your factories. God forbid you never have a recall that hurts someone.
Well, I think
these are the things that industry is struggling with every day, but they're acting on it. They're not sitting on their hands. There's no one in the food industry at all that goes to sleep at night going, I'm not worried about salmonella, I'm not worried about E. coli, I'm not worried about a recall. We all worry about that 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I think actually Fedele is somebody in the industry who does worry about these things every single day.
But the point is, we all worry about them, but we have to have better analytical tools to work in our factories, to work on our food supply chain. I mean, look what happened to Odwalla for the lack of 1 millipore filter.
I think I'm going to move on to Fedele now for the interest of time. Thank you, Howard. Fedele, I just wanted to ask you a few questions about some of the work that you've been doing recently. You mentioned in particular the emphasis on farm workers. And I was hoping you could start with that. I know that you have a commitment to supplying local. It's been a huge sort of focal point for Bon Appétit. But talk to us a little bit about how that's been sort of bearing out. Obviously, you've been an industry leader in purchasing antibiotic-free meat, cage-free eggs, safe seafood. But I'm really curious about how the cost analysis has been working out and focusing on the farm worker piece.
The farm worker. It's hard for me to hear you.
I know, it's hard for me to hear you too.
Farm workers. Farm workers. Yeah. Broccoli, tomatoes.
I thought I was gonna debate Mars over here, but Howard. But
Do it.
We could do that.
no, I don't want to get into it because half the things you said I don't even understand. All I know, Howard, is that we are a very highly sustainable company, a business that has grown well over $1 billion Last year, I served over 200 million meals in this country in a very highly sustainable way, and somehow we're profitable, so it works. So that's all I know. Farm worker rights.
Oh, great.
I have spent a lot of time in the fields with those all over the United States. It started in Florida with the issues of the tomato growers in Immokalee, where we were the first company to write the code of conduct for them, and we try to audit them and so forth. We banned tomatoes for a while. I went to Ohio. I've been in San Diego. I've been in our own strawberry fields here in Salinas. Been all over the country. And I really believe strongly that if we don't do something, and I know that there's an issue with immigration and all that, we don't do something with farm worker rights to take care of these people, I don't know who the hell's going to harvest our agriculture in this country. I really worry about that. Right here in the strawberry fields, if you went with me and walked those fields, you would see havoc. I mean, I have seen places where there's no bathrooms, there's no shade, there's no water. The wages are horrible. Where they live is disgusting. And yet we allow all of this to go. We take care. We are now up to moving towards $16 minimum wage or $15 in California. We're well over that now as a company, but we're moving to try to help our food service workers and everybody else. But what about the people in the fields? I so worry about that. So we have worked with Oxfam, United Farm Workers, a number of people to write these protections. I can send copies to all of you if you want it, trying to make people understand that this is the growers, that this is what we have to do. You've got to do something to support these people across the country. So I don't want any of us to forget that whole area. It's really critical, and it's happening in our own backyard. So when we support lots of farmers across the country, and we want to make sure when we audit them that before we give them any money or we buy from them, they're taking care of those workers with housing and all the other things that go on. I think it's critically important.
I do want to drill in a little bit about some of the recent changes that you're focusing on in terms of moving away from gestation crates and your whole liquid egg program. And I know that you're very passionate about making the right choice, but that's a costly choice as well for you as a business. Are you passing on that cost? How is that working for you on the economics?
Yeah, it's a costly choice, but I don't really care. I mean, we have tried. We're a little more expensive than other companies, and that's okay if I can deliver and execute what the dream was, to be really pure and not lip service when it comes to delivering sustainable food. For example, I don't serve any wild salmon. Now, I know a lot of people love salmon, and I can't get it all the time, so I just don't serve it. That's it. If you want, you can substitute Arctic char, and you'll get the same omega-3. But if I can't find the wild salmon, then I don't serve it. There's a lot of things like that. My biggest worry as we have grown as a company is supply. There's not enough supply out there, especially with swine, pork. Walter will tell you the same thing. There's not enough of the good stuff. We got a lot of the bad stuff. So we're lucky because we're not a chain. We customize everything. So we just don't serve it when we can't get it. Chipotle went through the same thing. So there's a big issue with supply. And the other issue is when you work with small producers like we do, distribution is another issue. So we're trying to work on that. A farmer wants to farm. He doesn't want to truck his food to my back dock. So we got to help them somehow do that. I don't believe we have an issue of feeding 10 billion people in the year 2050. I think if we can help change our ways in our diet to more of a plant-based diet and less protein, which is healthier for everybody, we don't need the kind of calories that we consume in this country. We will all be better off. That's one issue. Second issue is we've been spending a lot of time recently on waste. And if you go in those fields, as I talked about, 40%, first of all, 40% of what we grow in this country is wasted. But a good 20% or maybe more are in the fields, on the ground, that are just, we grow produce. You know that. So if we can fix the waste issue, what we waste, because we eat with our eyes are bigger than our stomach, waste in our homes and waste in the fields and waste in our restaurants, if we can do that, we'll be able to feed everybody. We just solve the waste problem in this country. So that's another thing we're working on that I feel strongly about.
And there is a food waste panel, so if food waste is a very important part of this as a solution. There's so many problems in the food system, but food waste is something that we can fix. And I really encourage you who are interested in that topic to go to that panel. I'm going to open it up to questions in just a few minutes, but before I do that, I want to ask each of you, tomorrow's panel, there'll be a discussion about the mechanisms for change. So, there are all sorts of incentives and taxes and regulations, market mechanisms that could potentially do what you're all talking about. I want to do this very quickly. I just want to go down the row. What each of you thinks as industry leaders, probably for yourselves as business leaders to get other retailers in this space to move that further, what for you is that mechanism for change?
Well, I think the most important thing is the responsibility of the companies to take direct action. So that's what I think. I think it's the direct action, the direct investment, stretch into whatever area is appropriate for your company and do something.
So lean in.
What?
Lean in.
That's right, I think.
Theresa?
I agree with that, and I'm sure I'm going to agree with everyone, but I really think as a cooperator, and I've been in a cooperative and dealing with that a lot, is that we have solutions. We've seen them over and over again. We're going to see them here. We have the solutions. We don't know how to work together. We're pretty bad at it. And unless we start looking at what does process mean, how do we, are we going to keep sacrificing the good for the perfect? We need to start really rethinking every day, all of us, how we are better working together.
Thank you. Howard?
I think there's two parts. One is uncommon collaborations. People that normally would...
Mike?
There's two parts. One part is uncommon collaborations, people that have never typically worked with each other, who have solutions that are very varied and actually are complementary to each other. And then with your competition, we have something called Cocoa Action, which represents 95% of all the cacao beans that are utilized in the world. There's more attorneys in the room than there are participants to make sure we aren't colluding on price. But we're trying to solve problems on a massive scale, whether it is farm workers' rights or nutrition or schooling or child labor. The list goes on and on when you're working in a neotropical crop. But by doing this in a manner that's acceptable to governments and regulators, you can actually make quite a giant headway. And right now it's about $250 million a year just in certification costs that this group has put together for the crop itself.
Fedele?
For me, Naomi, it's all about messaging. It's all about telling the story that we all know what it is, but making sure that story has an emotional connection to consumers. We are not going to legislate changes in concentrated animal feeding operations, or factory farms. I think it's got to come from consumers asking the right questions and understanding all of these issues that we talk about today. So messaging, to me, is where we need to start, the most important thing.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah,
which is,
please.
I just want to highlight what Fedele said about the farm workers. I think if you look at the cost of food system today, the one element that's really not built in at all is the cost of the farm worker. And the environment, to some extent, has made its way in through the transparency around pesticides. We ourselves have tried to build out a system called Responsibly Grown, which is in first generation about every produce that we sell, where it's from. But ultimately, even we haven't built in the cost of the farm worker. It's hard to get that social component built in the ways that, and I think Fedele's absolutely right. That is some very important work to really round out the true cost of food.
Yeah.
Hasn't happened yet.
All right. I'm sure many of you in the audience have some burning questions. I think there's a passed mic. Is there a microphone right here? So this lovely lady here in the front has 2 microphones. Will you please stand up? Please identify yourself and please direct your question to the individual.
Hi, I'm Maria, and I'm a junior at Stanford. A lot of you have mentioned that it's really up to the young people to get involved in the food movement, to really make direct change, and to hopefully advance a lot of the things that we've all been talking about. But how exactly do you envision young people getting involved if a lot of us are still either in college, trying to look for jobs, and getting involved in the food business is really difficult for us since we don't really have a lot of actual experience yet per se, but we have a lot of theoretical knowledge. So just how do you see us young people really getting involved in making a change?
Sweet.
Fedele?
Can I answer that? So my office is right across the street from Stanford. And you come see me afterwards. I'll give you a card. You can come see me in Palo Alto. We'll have a discussion. And I'll probably put you on an internship, and we'll probably hire you.
Woohoo!
I thought she was going to ask you for a pay raise already.
Yeah. My name is Axel Nærstad. I'm coming from Norway. I'm coordinating a global network named More and Better for more and better support for agricultural rural development. My question is to Mr. Shapiro, but first a comment. You said that the Green Revolution in India eradicated hunger. Excuse me, there are 150 million people starving in India today. You also mentioned Swaminathan, the father of the Green Revolution in India. I have some contact with Swaminathan, and I want to quote him. He said, what we did with the Green Revolution in India in the 1960s was totally correct with the knowledge we had then. Now we see that we filled the grain storages, but not the empty stomachs. Now we see that the soil is damaged. Now we see the erosion of biodiversity, the overuse of water. To do the same today would be a crime. So my question to you, is, wouldn't it be possible to increase the production sustainable also in India if you had used the same resources as governments put in for the Green Revolution? And my second question is, how can we demystify and really say that the Green Revolution might have caused this, yes, yield increases on the short term, but it's totally damaging on the long term? What do you think is a key message to give out on that? Thank you.
So actually you and I and Norman Borlaug all agree with Swaminathan that the Green Revolution was a solution to a problem. Neither of them, and I know them both quite well, and Borlaug in particular before he passed away, ever thought that the Green Revolution as described, as you talked about, would last 50 years. They thought it was just a Band-Aid on a problem, and that civil society, science, governments, research institutions would solve the problem and improve it. But we didn't do that. We actually got quite lazy because it worked and we didn't improve it very much. So the problem was innovation and the money to innovate after this one innovation happened. We're very slow to change when we can just sort of say, it's working pretty well. Why really worry about the future? And so my answer is, to demystify it, we need to talk about why it happened, and they never ever thought we would follow those practices for 50 years. Borlaug on his deathbed lamented that people did not improve agriculture post this one problem that was solved.
Other questions?
Thank you to the panelists, and my name is Paul Shapiro, the second Shapiro, but I want to thank all the panelists for a great conversation, and especially to Whole Foods and Bon Appetit. I know Naomi had brought up their policies on not using any eggs from caged hens or pork from crated pigs. My hat is off to you, literally, at this moment for that. My question really is for Fedele. You had mentioned in one of your comments about the importance of moving toward a plant-based diet. I know that Patrick Holden, in an interview he did on the Civil Eats website a few days ago, talked about how we're not going to get to sustainability without a shift toward eating a lot fewer animal products as well. What's Bon Appetit doing on this to help its own 200 million meals that it's serving go in a plant-based direction?
So if you hear me, is this on? Yeah. So Paul, that's a good question. We didn't design our menus to be plant-based. It happened because that's what customers seem to want. If I take you back 10 years ago, the only thing that was a vegetarian thing was an option would be a damn salad bar, right? That was it. Now, there are stations that are gluten-free, that are vegan, that are vegetarian. We do unbelievable vegetarian food. But what's happening is, if I look at my total spend, the millions of dollars we spend in food, in categories, I can tell you we spend more in produce and vegetables than we do in meat or protein. And that was, if I take you back 8 years ago, that was reverse. It was the other way. So there's a lot of things going on. We just partnered with a company called Hampton Creek. You're going to hear about them tomorrow, which does, it's a product you can buy in a grocery store called Just Mayo. That is all based on plants and no eggs at all. You can find it in Whole Foods. Walter carries it. An amazing, no cholesterol, no animals, nothing, and it's as good as Heilmann's or Best Foods. We're working with another company and doing some testing called Impossible Foods, which is right here in Redwood City, where they have produced a burger out of plants. And believe it or not, the chew and the taste is just like meat. And so what's happening is technology is changing the landscape of agriculture. And I think you're going to see in the next 5-6 years, what we put into our bodies is going to be completely different than what we put into it today. Products are going to be so unique and different. And we're going to be using plants in so many more ways than we ever have before. One of my best friends is Jose Andres, and if you are in Washington, D.C., you will see a concept called beefsteak, which is all vegetables. It's going to be the next Chipotle. It's amazing. And in fact, there's going to be one at the Stanford Shopping Center, hopefully by Christmas, and I'm putting one in, because I have a license with him, at Google. So this is going to be an amazing thing. It's all plant-based, no meat at all, and they line up around the block for this stuff. So I think the world is changing, and I do think that we're all moving towards a plant-based diet in terms of health like never before.
Can I make one comment on plant-based diets?
We're really pressed for time, so if you can make it really quickly, please.
We still have to work on the nutritive value of those plants. We have not put the effort in nutrition, in breeding programs around the world on what a plant could deliver in order to realize what Fedele is talking about. And I've been a vegan 60 years.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Eli Zegas, and I work for the nonprofit Spur. And I have a question about how to internalize more of these costs. I think all of your companies have done great work and found a way in the market to make money for making better choices. I'm skeptical that companies across the economy are going to make the same choices. And because of that, I think we need to look to policy to help us internalize things for people who aren't going to make the choices you've made. And that it's a lot to ask you all and individual companies to make a choice that raises the cost of food when their competitors don't have to face the same increased cost. So I want to plug Naomi's question a little harder, which is I'm looking for uncommon collaborators among you all on policy change at the national or local level. And if you could name 2 policies, not 2 market things you could do, but 2 policies that your companies would support to internalize the cost of food, what would it be? Where could we look to you for support? And for example, the kinds of things I'm talking about are state or national soda taxes, reducing or removing commodity subsidies, national carbon pricing, or increasing the national minimum wage. Those kinds of policies, could you name 2 each that you'd want to see happen that we could look to you as allies?
Wow, tough. Where's Kathleen? There's someone for your policy work
Sign him
here.
up, man.
Yeah.
Run for Congress.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I got what you're saying, but let me just read you. This happened in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week, an interview with the Cargill CEO, who basically said his business model is broken, and he's saying that the mainstream food brands that rely on low-cost commoditized ingredients that have been the specialty of companies like Cargill is not really working anymore. And he says, this is a direct quote, this is the CEO, they want to know what's in their food, who made it, what kind of company it is, are they ethical, how do they treat animals? I have seen in the last 2 years an absolutely tectonic shift in major CPG companies that are making this direction towards greater transparency, and I've never seen anything like it, and I've been in the food business 35 years. So I would argue to you that actually it's the customers that are driving the change, and the customers are moving the companies, and the companies are moving, and it's starting to happen at scale. And I know all that because I can see it on the supply side of the business, where we are in competition for supply like I have never seen. In fact, there's no longer true cost accounting on the supply side of organics because now it's an irrational market. All right? So I would submit to you that all this work that's happening is having an effect and is moving companies and creating real change. To your question, though, I would say for me, the 2 ones that come up, one is the initiatives around supporting green grocers in different areas. The government has put some programs together, states have put some programs together, even cities have put some programs together that are encouraging developers to develop sites for grocery stores. And I think that we don't need them, but that will encourage many stores to be able to open in areas that don't currently have them. I think that's great thinking. I think it's an appropriate role for government to provide that opportunity and the support that they need. The second one is the Farm Bill, which Kathleen mentioned is coming up. And that is the home of subsidies. And last time they took a whack at it. This time they need to take a bigger whack at it to kind of, there's no subsidies for fruits and vegetables to the point that was made earlier, or very few. So there's a big opportunity to go at that thing and start now working on how that might move for 2018.
Can I say something too? My passion right now is in, and I don't want to use the word subsidize, I like the word incentivize, because I think it's broader and it doesn't necessarily mean always money. But I think that my passion right now is to incentivize grass-based and perennialization of agriculture, and especially grass. And when we talk about meat, which I agree, we need to cut the amount of meat that it's just, I live in the Midwest and I'm surrounded by corn, and now they're going to spray it with dicamba and 2,4-D, and it's just a nightmare for us. But if we incentivize grass in grass-based agriculture, we're going to do many, many things. We're going to have a lot more humane animal treatment. We're going to have a higher nutritious food. We can sequester carbon. We can have carp farms even. And when we start looking at technical innovations and we think about the perennialization, we have to start drawing carbon out of the air right now. It's no longer enough to just stop to just look at it from an energy point of view. So this is a Farm Bill thing. If we can incentivize pasture and perennialization of ag, we have those solutions. Like I said, we can solve a lot of problems. So I know that wasn't on your list, but one of the things that is on your list that I also support is definitely the $15 minimum wage.
Let me just mention one thing. I agree with what Walter said about consumers and the Farm Bill and subsidies. One more thing that I would do. First of all, let me just caution you. I don't believe because the lobbyists are so strong. I have been there with the Pew Commission trying to deal with this issue. You're not going to legislate these changes. It has to come from consumers. But if I was sitting in Washington, I would do something to deal with the issues of non-therapeutic antibiotics in protein. We've been banging our heads against that for I don't know how long. But that issue of antibiotic resistance you heard about today in protein is so important. in this country. And we've got, and I really think we got to do something about it legislatively.
And I would say the
Howard, your
transparency.
mic again. Is your mic working? Yeah.
For whatever reason it's not working, I'll shout. Transparency in supply chains. Being able to go back to the farm, to the land that it was grown on, whether you do it through third-party certification, which I think is a not so successful model, though we all pay for certification when we go to the market, or you use isotopal markers which come from the water in the exact spot where the crop was grown, which you can do very cheaply with handheld tools. Transparency is going to be absolute necessary. There's so many issues about illegality that are coming up in the world. In many areas, the only way we're increasing production is to cut down the last of the remnant rainforest. The second thing is, listening to Clyde this morning on the Kaiser Permanente, absolute reduction in salt in food. The cost of what salt does for us long-term to human health is absolutely known. It's not quite like smoking cigarettes, but it's pretty close. And so that'll be one of the things, along with sugar, that have to be reduced and taken out of our diet to a very substantial level.
Patrick.
I wanted to build on your question about mechanisms for change and strongly endorse the last questioner by asking you a question which probably you won't want to answer, but I'd like you to hold it, which is, you've all shown incredible leadership in building businesses in an economic environment which is completely distorted, even corrupt, you could say, making it very, very difficult to do what you've done. But I'm not wholly satisfied with the answers you've given yet about how you can respond to what we've heard this morning in directly relationship to the mechanisms for change, because I think we need from you as leading food businesses new partnerships or individual actions which will then force the changes that we need to get rid of the distortions of the economic environment. And I feel that starts now. It's not what you've done, it's what you do after today in moving into that territory, not just in your entrepreneurial leadership, as the Prince mentioned, but actually in how you form these new partnerships. And I don't really want to know answers today, because this is the beginning of a new chapter, but I hope that you will think about that, because otherwise you're just operating within the existing environment and you're waiting for your consumers to change, but you can also show some leadership, because you're going to get a big response.
So, we might hear a new announcement where Whole Foods, Organic Valley, Mars, and Bon Appetit are launching a new initiative by the end of this event. And with that, we have 29 seconds, so I think Albert Strauss will be asking the last question.
Just quickly.
No, not quickly. This is one of the greats of all this over the last few years. Let's give a hand to Albert Strauss.
I think one of the biggest risks and urgencies is that farming is going away. Farmers are 1% of the population. Our rural communities are disappearing. And I wanted to find out, this is a quick question, what are you specifically doing as businesses to help revitalize rural communities and farming?
Long-term contracts, and in some cases investing in the farmer to be able to buy more land and to grow out to meet the demand. So long-term contracts.
Theresa?
Well, that's our mission. People see us as an organic company, but organic's just the vehicle. The mission's very, very strong. It's to keep families and farmers on the land farming, and to also support rural communities. And we have lots and lots of things that we do to do that. And then we do it by the means of organic agriculture. A lot of people see organics first, organics third for us. It's very, very important. We're dedicated to it. We've worked on the standards, but Albert, it's our mission, and we're doing pretty good. We now have 1,837 farmers that we've kept farming. I actually sat with a farmer who cried, saying, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So, and then we're about to take on 200 or 300 more. It's kind of hard work because we have to grow the market with the farm, and it's, utilization and blah, blah, blah. But it's our mission, and I'm actually want to say how proud I am to work for Organic Valley because it's the most meaningful work I've done in my life, so I feel terribly grateful.
Training. We can't be anonymous players in the global market. We have to train the people who we expect to produce the raw materials that we're going to use for iconic products that we have. In West Africa, we're probably training 200,000 cacao farmers right now to increase their yields from 400 to 1,500 kilos per hectare of cacao. Seems rather modest when we know you can probably grow 6,000 kilos, but to go from 400 to 1,500 lifts people out of poverty. It doesn't take them to full prosperity in the definition that we have, but it does change the rural sector significantly. So I think training is one of the greatest things we can do. And I think we have to do things that are innovative that no one expects that we do because we have profitability and get to do it, which is the economics of inclusiveness, or it's the mutuality of economics. And that's as important about how you spend your profit as almost anything else that you can talk about.
Fedele?
Well, we've been working with small farmers since we started the company. So we have hundreds and hundreds, well over 1,000 small farms across the United States that we buy from. We make sure they get their money quickly. That's important. We've worked to try to get larger produce companies to come in, and we tell them where to go to what farms so that we're helping them with distribution. We do a lot of things like that. So I'm very proud of the fact that, and I think that we were the ones in the early 90s to coin farm to fork. So we've been doing this a long time, and we'll continue to do this.
Thank you all so much today for being here.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thanks, Naomi. Good job.